the truth, and nothing but the truth. This is GBN, the Gospel Broadcasting Network.
We shall rise on that resurrection morning when death's prison bars are broken. We shall rise. We shall rise.
Welcome again to Counterpoint. I'm Mike Hickson, and I have with me today B.J. Clark. B.J., it's always so good to be with you.
I enjoy it.
B.J., today we're talking about the meaning of life, and sadly there are a lot of people in the world today, they don't understand the meaning of life. They're on this quest, and they're looking for something, and they're trying to find something that brings a sense of fulfillment to life, but they just can't find it. And so some turn to, for example, materialism. Is it possible for materialism, the things of the world, to fill that vacuum?
If we ask someone who's been there and done that and got the t-shirt and wrote about it, here's what he would put on the t-shirt. I was the richest man in the world, and I had so much money I could buy anything I wanted. I hated life. That's Ecclesiastes 2. Solomon didn't write it on a t-shirt. He wrote it in his inspired diary called the Book of Ecclesiastes. Sure. And what he said there was that his goal in life was, Ecclesiastes 2:1, enjoy pleasure. I get up every morning, and what's your quest? What's the meaning of life to you, Solomon? It's to enjoy pleasure. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, I send in the clowns and make me laugh. And so he said, I said of laughter, what good does it do? So Solomon said that didn't work, so I tried wine. Verse 3 of Ecclesiastes 2. He sought to give himself to wine, yet not becoming irrational. He wanted to acquaint his heart with wisdom. And so Solomon, how's that working for you? Is this giving you the satisfaction you seek? No, so he became a workaholic, verse 4. And Solomon, how's that working for you? He said, I made me great works. I builded me houses and vineyards. And are you happy? He said, well, so I tried women. I tried wealth. He goes down the list. He tells you everything that he tried, and then he gives you the bottom line in verse 11. He said, I looked on everything I'd done, and it was all emptiness. It was vanity, grasping for the wind. I've got something. I've got it. Mm-hmm. Finally captured it. Open your hand, Solomon. Show us what you've captured.
That's right. Nothing.
There's nothing there. And this man, you ask about materialism, he said, whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. Ecclesiastes 2:10. You and I, Mike, I'm sure, have had occasions when we've wanted to buy a particular item, but we had to delay that gratification because we just couldn't afford it.
That's right.
Solomon never felt that. And we've been told by the world, if you could ever get to the point where you have so much money, you could buy whatever you wanted the moment you wanted it, you'd be the happiest guy on the planet. Solomon says, let me save you a lot of heartache. I've been there. I've done that. I hated life.
And you know what? I think in light of what you just said, in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, there is a window into exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And here's what he said. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. He said, this also is vanity. All he's saying, BJ, is the more you get, the more you want. But and you think that there's this silver lining out there that's going to just automatically make you happy and satisfied, and guess what? It just leaves you wanting more.
You see these athletes, they're making $12 million a year. One in particular comes to mind. He's a backup player making $11.9 million a year, and he won't stand for the national anthem, and he has all these persecutions that he's going through. $11.9 million a year, okay? There are individuals like him that want to renegotiate their contract. And why? Well, because one man some years ago, he was making $25 million a year. He demanded the club renegotiate his contract. And they asked him about this, and he said, I've got to feed my family. If you can't feed your family on $25 million a year, what are you eating? And so but you know, we look at, that's an extreme example. Let's bring it a little closer to home. Have we ever said, any of our viewers ever thought, Have we ever thought, you know, if I could just make X number of dollars a year, I think I'd finally be happy. I'd be content, be satisfied, be enough to pay the bills, put a little bit aside, and I'd be happy.
That's right.
And then lo and behold, we start making X number of dollars a year. And some 5 years later, maybe sooner, we're heard to say, you know, if I could make X number of dollars a year, I think I'd be happy then. And this vicious cycle continues. And we've got to be very careful to not fall for the lie that says a man's life consists in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Luke 12:15 says it doesn't.
And you know, in Luke chapter 12, Jesus told a parable about a rich farmer. And it's interesting, the I's and my's in that context.
Oh, yes.
And it was all about him and no one else, including God. And there are a lot of folks that live that way.
That's right.
And from the mind's eye, they have everything. But then, in reality, they really don't have anything.
No.
You know, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, here's what Paul said: godliness with contentment is great gain. I would dare say that there are a lot of folks in our world today, if you were to ask them point blank, are you content? They'd say, no, not really. Are you happy? No. Are you satisfied? No. And as you said a moment ago, Solomon had it all, but he wasn't happy. Right. He hated life. And how many people exit this life on their terms? In other words, they take their own life because they're not satisfied, they're not happy, they're not content. And yet Paul said godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into this world. He said it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these, he said, we shall be content. Don't you think he's trying to tell us something,
Absolutely.
BJ?
The casinos would be empty if people were truly content. Because are you telling me, Mike, that and that this is when they try to bring gambling into a community, they call it gaming instead of gambling. And they act as if it's just a place to go and have fun and play games. You know what? If you take the money component out of it, and if they announced at the casinos, hey, we're not going to offer any prizes, any cash prizes for winning, but you can still come down and play the game, and if you win, you'll be the victor. You won't get any money for it, but you'll at least win the game. Do you think that people would drive to those places just to play a card game, just to spin the wheel, just to gamble in some way, shape, or form? They could play those same games at home if they're only wanting to play a game. Right. No, it's about thirst for things. And I actually heard a story when I was fighting along with some others trying to keep gambling out of DeSoto County, Mississippi some years ago. I read a story that happened in another location where a businessman lost all that he'd brought with him that night to the casino. He went outside and he started thinking, I'm so frustrated. I know if I had a little seed money, I could get that back and more. Sold his car, his SUV, which was nearly brand new, sold it for next to nothing to someone on the parking lot so he could go back in, took his $3,000 or $4,000, went back in, lost every bit of that. Now he's lost his money, lost his car. He's got to call his wife and explain where their car is and what's going on. So he walks out, he sees a telephone pole, and this is an old-fashioned wooden telephone pole in this particular location. He looks both ways, and when he thinks no one is looking, he takes his face and smashes it deliberately into the telephone pole so that it will make him bleed and bruise. And then he calls his wife. He says, honey, I've been carjacked, and they beat me up in the face and took me to the ATM and made me take out all this money, and they took off with our car. Just lied to her. And then the bank told the wife, they said, ma'am, the amount of money your husband is telling you he got from our ATM is absolutely impossible. Now, this was a dignified businessman in his community. I tell you, this covetousness can take a man that's normally rational and reduce him to something like I've just described, which is absolutely amazing.
It is, and you know what? Here's what Paul said in light of what you just said. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. And then verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness. What's greediness? Covetousness.
Right.
He said, and pierce themselves through with many sorrows. Do you really think, and this, it's amazing, the con jobs that these people pull on people. You know, the casinos, they want you to think they're into giving you money.
Right.
Look, they're into shaking you out of your money. They don't want to give you money. What business wants to get? They're in business to make money, but they know that people come down there to win, and to win big, and so they prey upon those people.
Absolutely. And there have to be more losers than winners for the casinos to make any money. They're just trying to convince you'll be the exception, you'll be the winner. And there's so many people whose lives have been ruined.
That's right.
Because they fell for that lie. And Satan's been telling this lie since the Garden of Eden. The meaning of life, doing things that make you happy that God won't let you do. That's what Satan tried to convince Eve. God knows something that would really fulfill you that he won't let you have. So you ought to just go ahead and take it anyway. And there are people today who are falling for that lie.
That's right. You know, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul said to Timothy, "But you, O man of God, flee these things, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness," which really suggests to us that contentment, happiness, satisfaction in life comes from within, and it's not controlled by externals. And yet the world sees those variables as what makes them happy. What about power, BJ? I know that there are people that, you know, power can be an insatiable thing.
Sure.
And there are people that are on this quest for power, and they think, you know what, if I could just be the president of this corporation or the CEO of this organization or whatever, then I know I'll be happy.
You asking that reminded me of Jeremiah 9, where Jeremiah says in verse 23, "Let not the man," and this is, by the way, something the Lord said, "Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might," his power or his strength, his military power, or his prestige and power and position. "Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understands and knows me, that I'm the Lord, that exercise loving kindness, judgment, righteousness in the earth. In these things I delight, saith the Lord." But what is Satan trying to get us to think? That true delight is found in education, in the mighty man having more might, in the rich man having more riches. Now, we're not anti-education. We're not anti-having enough money to provide for yourselves. But Jesus said, don't labor for the meat which perishes, but labor for that which endures unto everlasting life. John 6 and verse 27.
That's right. That's right. BJ, another quest that people are sometimes on, or maybe they're on this quest for meaning and happiness and purpose in life. And so they think, you know what, maybe if I could just be famous.
Yeah.
If I became a household name, then surely I'd be happy. How do you counter that mentality? Because there have been a lot of, you know, Solomon, you were talking about Solomon a minute ago. The Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. She said the half hasn't been told. He was a very prominent individual. Famous, great, as we would say.
She traveled more than 1,500 miles one way with an entourage at a time when modern transportation wasn't available. What would motivate her to travel so far to see a man like that? Well, his wisdom that God gave him. But you know, it's interesting, you talk about the fleeting nature of riches. Power is also fleeting. Solomon, your kingdom's going to be taken from you. The same man that was so wise that the woman who heard him said the half has not been told is now told by God, because he wouldn't live according to God's standard. I'm going to rent this kingdom from you and take it. And so what about the idea of fame? There's a reason why the phrase 15 minutes of fame exists.
Sure does.
Because fame is fleeting. And if I ask individuals today to name for me the top 10 best-selling books of 1933 or of 1953 or of 1973, generally speaking, that would be so fast and out of our minds, even if we knew the answer back then, unless we're preparing to go on Jeopardy and try to know some of this stuff. Most people don't just carry that information around in their heads. I'm a big sports fan, Mike. I love to watch the Super Bowl, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not one of those sports fans that could sit here and tell you the last 10 Super Bowl winners without giving some real thought to it. Now, who was it that was even in the Super Bowl 4 years ago? I don't know.
I don't either.
And so, you know, and I'm sure I watched it, and I'm sure I enjoyed the event, but it's so temporary, it's so fleeting.
And BJ, I think you hit a vein there. Many of us, I'm sure a lot of us, have seen these pop-up ads or whatever on the internet, or maybe you're looking at a magazine and it'll ask the question, what do these stars look like today?
Oh, yes.
Or Sports Illustrated, you know, where are these athletes today? And many of us have seen men that at one time they were at the apex of their sport, and they were a household name. And then you've got a new generation that comes on the scene, and you mention their name, and they're like, who are they? I don't know who they are. And then some of those individuals, sadly, physically, their health has eroded. Materially, they've spent all their money. They have nothing. I read about a young girl that was an actress back in the 70s, a very prominent television actress, household name, household face. And the last time I saw, she was living in a trailer park, and as far as I know, had nothing. So as you said a minute ago, 15 minutes of fame, that doesn't last long.
No, there's got to be more. And that's what Ecclesiastes is all about. There's got to be something more than this. And Solomon's looking everywhere for it, can't find it. You know, there were sports athletes that used to dominate the sports pages because they were playing. Now they're not even playing anymore. And you ask people about them, and some of the folks who follow their careers can still tell you about them, but just wait 20, 30, 40, 50 years and then see how many people know about them. The truth is, they're going to be known by very few.
That's right.
And even those few will, in time, forget them, because if you stop and think about it, I saw a cemetery the other day. I went through a cemetery recently, an old one, and Mike, the wind and the weather had effaced the names on several of those tombstone markers that I looked at. I couldn't tell you who was buried there. And I'm sure at the time they died, their passing was exceedingly meaningful.
Sure.
And to the people that knew them and loved them. But let's just be real about this. With the passage of time, people are going to forget. And the time can erase certain things and almost erase the idea that we were ever even here.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. You know, BJ, I guess maybe 25 years ago, my grandmother died. And my grandmother was not a wealthy lady. She lived with her sister. They were both widows and faithful members of the church. And my grandmother had a little bit of money in the bank, not much. And about everything that she owned fit in a bedroom. And she may have had I think she had her own chair out in the den. But basically it was about one room full of furniture. And I remember telling a friend of mine after she died and sometime later, I said, you know, it's really amazing. She died, and then I had the responsibility of trying to take care of what she left behind. And I said, you know, it's almost as if she's never been here, because, you know, her things, we tried to give them to certain people that would have appreciated it. And you know, really, with the exception of her grave and memories, there's nothing to mark her time here on earth.
Right.
And so there has to be something more to life than just what we see with the visible eye. And I think that's what Solomon's trying to drive home, that look, well, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, what did Solomon say? Right.
The whole essence of man, the whole of man, is to fear God and keep His commandments. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. I saw another poster, and it had a tombstone marker on it. and it had their name on it, and it had their date of birth and date of death, and then these questions underneath it. Was he rich? Was he handsome? Was he popular? Does any of that matter now?
Wow.
And that really does sober you up and make you think.
It really does. It really does. Because in the grand scheme of things, going back to what Jesus asked, what does it profit a man if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? When it's all said and done, what's it really matter what you have? Because ultimately, BJ, as Paul noted in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. What God requires of us is to be a faithful steward. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2. And so we just possess what we have for a period of time, and then when it's all said and done, guess what? It goes to somebody else.
Absolutely.
And Solomon talks about that in the book of Ecclesiastes. And so how do we get people, because you mentioned the devil a minute ago, and the devil has done a tremendous job of masking the purpose of life. And let's just be honest, he's blinded the minds, the eyes of many, many folks in the world today. And so how do we get people to see the true essence, as you said a moment ago, of life?
We've got to get them to realize the truth of Matthew 6, 19 and following. Don't lay up treasures upon the earth. Why? Because they can be stolen.
That's right.
They can be taken from you. Moth and rust can corrupt them. Lay up treasures in heaven, and they'll never be taken from you. Verse 21. It's another Colossians 3:1. Set your affection on things above, if you then be risen with Christ. Verse 1. Then seek Christ who is above, and seek the things that are above, beyond this life, because the things of this life will never satisfy. I did a funeral that sticks out in my mind. The last time that the family walked by the coffin, they all took 2 brand new $1 bills and put them in that coffin, and they closed that lid, and the money is still there. Why would they do this? Their particular loved one had this quirk where he said every night before they'd leave him, he'd say, now check my sock and put $2 in there, because if I get discharged before you get back here, I want to have enough money on my person to buy a cup of coffee and a newspaper. Okay, that shows you how long ago this was too.
Wow.
Okay, here he is. He's got his $2 in his sock, just in case. And when they filed by the casket the last time, they all put $2 in his casket, just to remember that quirk about him.
Sure.
Not because they really thought he could use it. But Mike, I want to ask you something. Ask our viewers something. If they put $2 million in there, would that have changed his circumstance one bit?
No.
There wouldn't have been any value to putting any amount in there. And I drive by a junkyard in Piedmont, Alabama, which is one of the biggest acreages of cars that I've ever seen in my life, all sitting there in acre after acre. And it strikes me as I'm thinking that, you know what? Every single car out there in that field used to be someone's brand new ride.
Sure did.
And they were proud of it.
I guarantee you.
I look at my new car, want to ride my new car, want to drive my new car. And now where is it? It's sitting in a field being harvested for parts, and maybe a dormitory for rats or whatever else is living out there. I don't want to sound morbid, but here's the beauty of it. We don't have to live in such a way so that when we lose our car or our wardrobe is worn by someone else, or our bank account is being managed by someone else,
That's right.
that therefore that's the end of our time. No, we have a life beyond this life, Mike, that is really something.
You know, BJ, I can't help but think about an example that's right here in our own hometown about what you're saying, and that's Graceland.
Yeah.
And you know, anybody that's ever been to Graceland, I mean, it's mind-boggling to go through the house, and I think what really stood out to me when I went out and saw just the gold records, and you know, it's overwhelming. You see, you know, all of his personal effects and this home, and I remember the first time I ever went through, I thought, you know what, I thought he was famous, but this guy, he was something. I mean, he was something. And so we go through this tour, and you're listening to all that he did and how great he was, and then you see I mean, you can't help but just be impressed. This guy was a world figure. And then you step out into the back, and you wind your way around, and you come to a place where there are 3 graves. Elvis, his mama, and his daddy. And I thought, you know, all this stuff that he has, it's all his stuff. He's not using any of it. And now he has left a sizable estate that people are still using and enjoying, but he has no benefit of it.
He's making more money now than he made when he was alive, as far as his estate is concerned. And for what? For him personally, what does that mean?
And so it really, I think, helps to put into perspective. And you look at the life of Elvis, and you ask, okay, so you had all this stuff, but isn't there more to life?
Absolutely. And you flip channels on television, and you'll see these stories, story after story after story, Mike. This person had nothing. They became famous and had everything. They lost everything because of their addictions to drugs or this, that, or the other. And now they're trying to get their life back, and they try to end on a happy note. How many times is that shown on television with just different personalities plugged into that same narrative?
That's right, that's right. BJ, we've got about a minute left. Very quickly, I can't help but think about a personal story. I was talking one time to the granddaughter of the late N.B. Hardeman, and she was telling me one time Sister Bradshaw said that he asked, what's going to happen to my trinkets when I die? And of course, because you are the director of the Memphis School of Preaching, on your campus, you have a lot of his personal effects. And Brother Hardeman was a great, great man.
Yes.
And the difference in Brother Hardeman and others, Brother Hardeman, while he had a lot of stuff, his faith was in God.
Right.
And he understood the importance of laying up treasure in heaven very quickly. What does a person need to do to become a child of God?
They'll believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and then repent of their sins and be baptized as a confessing believer in Christ. The book of Acts teaches that the penitent confessing believer will be saved and then can continue to live for Christ until the day that Christ comes back or the day they die and go and meet him.
And that's a beautiful thought, to one day go to heaven. We appreciate so much you being with us today. BJ, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a part of our program. Hope to see you right back here again next week. Until then, God bless.
Rise on that resurrection morning when death's prison bars are broken. We shall rise. We shall rise.
Gospel Broadcasting Network offers a free, non-denominational Bible course. It's based strictly on God's Word and not the creeds or traditions of men. Why not contact us for lesson number 1?
Walking in sunlight, sunlight of love, heavenly sunlight, heavenly sunlight.
You may want to enroll by email. The address is info@gbntv.org. To enroll by phone, call us toll-free at 888-805-3390.